King Philip's War, which took place from 1675 to 1676, was one of the most devastating conflicts in early American history. It marked a critical turning point in the struggle between Native Americans and English colonists. Named after the Wampanoag leader Metacom, who was known as King Philip, the war erupted over growing tensions surrounding land, resources, and cultural survival. This brutal conflict ravaged New England, leading to widespread destruction, the loss of thousands of lives, and the near collapse of Native American resistance in the region. In this video, we'll explore the causes, major battles, and far-reaching consequences of this violent clash that forever altered the relationship between indigenous peoples and European settlers. Massasoit, also called the Great Sachem, was a leader of the Pokanoket and Wampanoag people, who are part of the Algonquian tribes in New England. He controlled an area that stretched from Narragansett Bay to Cape Cod, which included New Hampshire, Martha's Vineyard, and the Elizabeth Islands. The decrease in Native American numbers in New England greatly affected how Native Americans interacted with the English. In the 17th century, trade helped maintain peace between the English and Native Americans. However, changes in European clothing styles reduced the value of wampum, making Native Americans less important as trading partners. The Native Americans in New England started using guns, but their way of life often conflicted with English customs. King Philip's War was an important event in New England's history, involving many English settlers who were looking to expand and claim land. After his father's death in 1661, Philip became the leader of the Pokanoket tribe. He felt the responsibility of guiding his people during a difficult time. In 1675, tensions rose between the English and the Wampanoag, similar to a Cold War. This led to the trial of 3 Wampanoag for the murder of John Sassamon. The decision was the same among both white and Indian judges. The addition of the Indian jurors was meant to create a division between Philip's pagan followers and the Christian Indians from Plymouth. Finding out who the real Philip is difficult, and showing that the myths about him are wrong teaches us why good historians always question things. Other pictures of Philip over the years have been more popular than Revere's etching, but none help us understand the true Philip better. King Philip's War was an important war in the American colonies, with the English playing a key role. The war started when Boston leaders got ready to protect Swansea while the Narragansetts were trying to make peace. The English held on to the hope of talking things over, but what happened in Swansea got in the way of Boston's attempts to negotiate. Massachusetts Bay quickly helped Plymouth colony, and several groups met on Dedham Plain to go to Swansea. Philippine troops faced many unsuccessful attempts to enter Pokanoket land, making the English hold on to the hope of talks. Captain Edward Hutchinson was sent by Boston leaders to meet with the Narragansetts again. The situation might have turned into full-blown fighting if Winthrop hadn't been able to calm things down. On July 19, 1675, the United Army moved through the Pocasset Swamp and fought only the back guard of the Wampanoag. 7 or 8 English people were killed, and others were injured. The English developed a new military plan to trap King Philip in the swamp and starve his people into submission. Philip crossed the Taunton River and ran north past Old Rehoboth, going straight into Nipmuc territory. The colony's war council decided that most of the caught Pawtucket were involved in the recent fighting, so they sold almost all of them into slavery. The English tried to win the support of the Nipmuc people for the British, but the leaders in Boston kept working on it. Captain Hutchinson, Thomas Wheeler, and Ephraim Curtis met with local leaders in Nipmuc territory, which resulted in a deadly surprise attack called Wheeler's Surprise. Philip and his followers teamed up with the Nipmuc at Narragansett, inspiring nearby Native American tribes. Boston officials decided to strengthen the border towns in the upper Connecticut River Valley by stationing Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Mohegan troops in Hadley, Massachusetts. In Maine, disputes over land were not as fierce as in the southern colonies, but other issues caused conflicts that led to war. The Abenaki attacked several towns and killed 80 English people. In 1675, the United Colonies were seriously threatened by the Narragansett group, who planned to attack the Connecticut River Valley. Reports of war preparations and attacks by the Nipmuc and Wampanoag tribes prompted the United Colonies to send 1,000 men to Narragansett territory. The armies of Massachusetts, Plymouth, and Connecticut joined together to attack a big Narragansett village in the Great Swamp, leading to a fierce fight. In winter 1676, the Algonquian victories struck the border towns of western Massachusetts, including Lancaster, Groton, Marlborough, Sudbury, and Medfield. The attack caused people to leave Lancaster, followed by strikes on Medfield, Northampton, Warwick, and Simsbury. The United Colonies focused on western Massachusetts and the Connecticut Valley, assigning Major Thomas Savage to lead a new attack. In March, the Algonquian forces had their best month, successfully attacking Groton, Northampton, Warwick, and Marlborough. The worst news of the day was that a company from Plymouth Colony led by Captain Michael Pierce was surprised and almost wiped out in Central Falls, Rhode Island. On March 28, Cannonshae's band struck Old Rehoboth. They burned 100 buildings in Providence, including Roger Williams's home. This event started the American Colonial War and the story of American imprisonment. The Massachusetts border was destroyed as people escaped from different places, and Marlborough was used as a military camp. Connecticut, worried that the war might move to its area, communicated with Governor Edmund Andros about using Mohawk soldiers to fight the Algonquian people. The Algonquian people, facing sickness and hunger, had a chance to plant crops, fish, and do other spring activities. This helped them refill their food supplies and boost their spirits. Attacks on English villages kept happening, including in places far away like Hadley, Worcester, Mendon, Wrentham, Medfield, Billerica, Braintree, and Woburn. The English fought a military war to stop the locals from getting food and supplies. They took or destroyed food supplies and disturbed the natives while they were fishing in their usual places. The Indian leadership started to weaken, with the first major defeat happening on April 3, 1676. In the 1670s, the United Colonies began an attack on the Native Americans in the Connecticut Valley, taking or killing almost 100 of them. The June assault was key to finishing the war because the locals left behind good fishing spots and some farmland. In June and July, the English had many successes. The Pennacook tribe, who were neutral, agreed to a peace deal, and Ninigret officially joined the English side with his Niantic tribe. In 1676, several missions were started to remove native influence in the southern colonies, which included capturing some native tribes. The Eastern War in Maine started on July 3, 1676, when the Treaty of Portland was violated. The war caused people to leave the area, attacks to happen, and towns to be destroyed. Boston officials sent 360 men, led by Major Richard Waldron, to support the towns in Maine and defeat the native forces. Waldron's actions resulted in the capture of 12 friendly Micmac at Cape Sable, which brought the rest of the eastern Abenaki into the conflict. captains William Hawthorne and Joseph Sill took part in a military practice where the Abenaki were supposed to pretend to fight against the English. However, the Abenaki were disarmed and sent to Boston instead. In November 1676, Mug Hagon started a peace journey to Boston which resulted in good terms for the English. The war in Maine ended suddenly in August 1677 because of actions taken by the British Crown and interests in Europe. The Treaty of Casco, signed on April 12, 1678, officially stopped fighting in Maine, but it didn't remove the hatred between the English and Algonquian people in northern New England. The Abenaki people in Maine dealt with heavy hunting, trapping, loss of forests, and new European diseases, which led to a decrease in their number. King Philip's War started in southeastern Massachusetts, an area where Philip and his family often went to hunt and fish. The war started after Philip's brother Alexander died and the treaty at Taunton was made. In 1671, officials from Plymouth Colony and Massachusetts Bay gathered in Taunton to ask Philip about reports of a possible war with the English. Philip agreed to go to Taunton Green, known as the training field, but only if Brown and Williams would stay behind as prisoners. During the war, Taunton became a busy military center with 8 guardhouses, but only 3 are still standing today. The town used to have a big tree called King Philip's Oak where Philip and his council often met. John Sassaman's death at Assawampset Pond in what is now Lakeville, Massachusetts, was the event that ignited the war. By 1675, the town of Swansea in Rhode Island had several groups living there. The last big agreement was with King Philip and his Pokanoket people, who were the first to experience their anger. The Miles River Bridge was where one of the first ambushes of the war took place. The Pokanoket waited quietly while Benjamin Church and Captain Prentice's soldiers rushed across the bridge. Native Americans lived in the Middleborough area for about 12,000 years, including during King Philip's War. The attack on Old Dartmouth destroyed the English military bases and what was left of the town. The Pokaset Swamp Fight is a debated historical event that many people don't know much about and guess about. King Philip's War in Massachusetts involved 3 Native American military sites: Wachusett, Manamoset, and Quaboag Old Fort. These sites were strategically located between Narragansett and Wampanoag territory to the south and the Connecticut River Valley Indians to the west. Manamoset was the most important Native American military site during the war, and the Nipmuc fled immediately after the outbreak of hostilities in 1675. In August 1675, Wheeler's surprise occurred within the bounds of present-day New Braintree. Captain Edward Hutchinson had been assigned the task of negotiating a treaty with the Nipmuc to keep them from joining Philip. The exact location of Captain Hutchinson's ambush and retreat in 1675 has been a topic of debate among historians and antiquarians. Captain Thomas Wheeler and his troops fled the ambush at New Braintree and sought safety at Quaboag, an isolated farming settlement during King Philip's War. The site features landmarks such as the Ayres Garrison, a memorial to John Ayres, and a well at which Major Wilson was shot. The exact site of the Ayres Garrison was in dispute in the early 19th century. The Battle of South Deerfield took place in Whately, Massachusetts, but there is no agreement on the precise location. In 1676, Mary Rowlandson of Lancaster stayed with her Indian captors at a camp near the Great Swamp. On September 12, 1675, the settlement at Deerfield was attacked by a small band of warriors who managed to burn 2 houses and steal several wagons full of food. Massachusetts Bay leaders decided to evacuate Deerfield and sent troops under Captain Thomas Lathrop to escort teamsters from Deerfield to Hadley. 2 memorials are located at the Bloody Brook site, marking the site of an ambush in 1675, The second memorial, the oldest surviving memorial to veterans in America, is found about 100 yards south of the marble monument. The Committee of Investigation was formed in 1835 to identify the precise location of the mass grave. Springfield, Massachusetts was made famous as the staging grounds for an Agawam-led assault on Springfield during King Philip's War. Massasoit Spring is a copper tablet in Warren, Rhode Island. It is thought to be where Sowams, the main village of the Wampanoag leader, was located. Philip's main town was south of Sowams, on the eastern side of the Mount Hope Peninsula, which is now part of Bristol, Rhode Island. The British force built a fort here after Philip left. Burrs Hill Park is located northwest of Philipstown, and was found by workers who were mining gravel in the mid-1800s. In 1913, archaeologists dug up 42 Wampanoag graves with the help of Charles Reed Carr, a local homeowner and library. Warren bought Burrs Hill in 1921 and turned it into a public park. In 1675, King Philip's War was an important event in colonial history, and colonial military leaders were often blamed for their decisions. Captain Daniel Henchman at Nipmuc is remembered for not following Philip but instead doing well in combat tasks across Nipmuc territory. The deadliest day of King Philip's War was December 19, 1675. On that day, more than 1,150 English and Mohegan forces struck the stronghold of the Narragansett tribe in the Great Swamp. The Narragansett campaign began on November 2nd, when commissioners charged the Narragansett of being involved in the bloody outrages of the barbarous natives in open battles with the English. Richard Smith Jr. talked about how the Narragansett people were opposing English requests and about the growing instability in Rhode Island. On October 27th, just before the deadline for the Narragansett to give Wampanoag to the English, Smith wrote to Winthrop in Boston. He mentioned that the Narragansett wanted to cooperate, but said it wasn't possible for them to do it right now. In December 1675, soldiers from New England came together to get ready for a fight with the Narragansett group. The Narragansetts, who fought alongside Philip in the first battle at Mount Hope, acted like they wanted peace to postpone the war. General Winslow told his soldiers to either kill or arrest any Narragansett they found. In 1644, Pumham, a leader of the Narragansett, said he was independent and joined forces with officials from Massachusetts Bay. Pumham's fort, held by English soldiers, protected the interests of both Pumham and Massachusetts Bay. Winslow's attempt to catch him was unsuccessful, so he captured 35 criminals instead. Pumham was attacked and killed at Dedham Woods in 1676. Richard Smith Jr. Smith's fort and trade post in Wickford, Rhode Island was selected as the starting point for the United Colonies' united forces. Smith's castle on Richard Smith Drive in North Kingstown has changed a lot over the years. Samuel Mosley's troops, along with Benjamin Church, were sent ahead of the Maine army to capture Smith's camp and start scouting. Quiapen's Queen's Fort, a natural stone fort, was never found by the English during the war and still stands today. General Winslow attacked the Narragansett tribes after Stonewall John visited Gira Bull's fort was destroyed and there were not enough food stores. The forces from Massachusetts and Plymouth marched south to join Treat's troops from Connecticut, and they spent a winter night camping around the Dark Bull Fortress. On December 19th, the colonial troops marched stiffly through the cold and snow, with Peter in the lead. The quickest way to the fort went through the Saugatucket, over Kingston Hill, and past Cannonshae's hideout. The Narragansetts knew about the fort's weak spots, which was crucial for the English. The Great Swamp Fight in 1776 was an important fight between the English and the Narragansett tribes. The Narragansett had 2 months to prepare their defenses and held almost every edge in the fight. However, Cannonshae's guidance in the fort was not very effective, which let the English reach the swamp almost without any trouble, depending only on the fort's walls for protection. The exact number of Indian losses is unclear because different English witnesses have provided differing figures. The Great Swamp Fight in New England was an important fight during the American Revolutionary War, where the English faced major losses. Captain James Oliver said that 68 troops died and 150 were injured, with many of the injured recovering. The Mohegan men were more important in the battle than the Plymouth soldiers. However, Captain Oliver's report showed a preference against using good Native Americans in the fight, and it included the evidence of Joshua Teft, who was later killed for treason. The Great Swamp Fight made it clear that the angry Narragansett people would continue to fight the English fiercely. Peace talks took place in December and early 1676, but it looks like both sides were just buying time to recover and plan their next steps. The Great Swamp Fight location has been argued about for the last 100 years, with today's historians and scientists having different opinions on where it actually happened. The statue attracts many tourists and is an important place for the heirs of both the English and Narragansett. They come together there every year to remember the fight. Since the monument was set up in 1906, historical and scientific studies have supported the doubts of those who believe the fort is incorrectly named. In 1959, scientists found nearly 2,000 pieces of bone, pottery, seashells, jewelry, and stones at a spot near the monument. In 1960, Joseph Granger did more digging near the Great Swamp Site and found that test holes within 150 feet of the monument had no artifacts. He found that traditional factors determined where the fort was placed, and that the land and surroundings suggested that the winter village in 1675 was just a normal yearly town in a frequently used safe area. Both professional and amateur researchers think there are elevated areas in the swamp, away from the memorial site and not shown on maps, that could suggest other possible locations for the fort. The Great Swamp Fight Memorial has a state marking in South Kingstown, Rhode Island. The Great Swamp Fight Memorial is a stone monument located near the old Cistercian monastery in Cumberland, Rhode Island. It was built in the early 1900s. This is the burial place of 9 English soldiers led by Captain Michael Pierce, who were captured and killed by the Narragansett in March 1676. In 1676, Captain George Dennison took 47 men and 80 good Native Americans through the Narragansett area. They caught a squaw who told them of Canonshay's camp near Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Canonshay went back to his hometown to find seed corn and was heavily involved in the war. He gave up and was taken to Stonington, Connecticut, where he was promised his life if he stopped fighting. He said no and was killed. On August 6, 1676, Weedemeaux died, and troops under Benjamin Church took a number of men in the camp of the Wampanoag Sachem Totosan, driving Totosan to his death. English troops and friendly Native Americans searched the area for King Philip, who was believed to be escaping south toward the Narragansett region. On August 11th, Church got information that would lead to Philip's death. King Philip's death is traditionally believed to have taken place at the Haffenreffer Museum of Anthropology in Bristol, Rhode Island. The Fruitlands Museums has a unique war club thought to have belonged to King Philip. This club was taken from his body by Alderman, an Indian who is known for killing him. The club was displayed at the museum until someone stole it in 1970. Benjamin Church was an important person in Little Compton, Rhode Island's past. He was a friend of the Native Americans in New England, and also a determined warrior against them. He met with the Sakonnet tribe at Treaty Rock, and they decided to join him in fighting Philip. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, now known as Maine, first showed signs of war in 1675 and 1676. On September 5, 1675, the Abenaki raided Thomas Purchase's home after Richard Beers and his soldiers were attacked in Northfield, Massachusetts. The Wakely family home in modern Portland was a sad reminder that King Philip's War had reached Maine with great intensity. Beyond Portland, raids on English towns kept happening during the fall of 1675 and into 1676. Captain John Boython's house in Saco was burned down by the Abenaki on September 18, 1675. On October 1, 1675, Richard Tozer's house in Newachawanek, now known as Berwick, Maine, was attacked by 2 Abenaki men named Andrew and Hope Hood. On August 13, 1676, Abenaki fighters attacked and burned Richard Hammond's stronghouse and trade post. Thomas Clark and Thomas Lake ran a trade post on the east side of Aroostook Island, close to Woolwich, Maine. On August 14, 1676, the Abenaki attacked the trade post and the natives entered through the fort gate after the guard. The first English group to attack the Indian fort in Ossipee, New Hampshire, was organized in December 1675. The fort was empty when Hawthorne and Sill got there, so everyone went home. The area is now included in the Prouts Neck Wildlife Preserve and Bird Sanctuary in Scarborough. The fort at Black Point, which is now Scarborough, Maine, was where Mug Hagon won one of his biggest battles and later died. Benjamin Church, a captain from Rhode Island, was important in the colonial forces during King Philip's War. Even though he was injured and had good relationships with many Indians, Church continued to fight against them, following them through swamps and woods. Church played a role at the start, during, and after the war, including the Peasfield fight, the killing at the Great Swamp, and the mission that resulted in King Philip's death. Church acknowledged the bravery and cleverness of the Indians in war. The Narragansett Indians were a strong opponent of the English. Church, even though he was warned not to leave his hat and sword for the Indians, chose to go get them. He shot at the Indians twice, which made them run away. In the winter of 1812, the Narragansett Indians started fighting against the English. Governor Winslow asked Mr. Church to lead a group on a mission to stop them. He suggested surprising some of the enemies and giving them captured enemies. Mr. Church and his team fought the enemy in a swamp protected by the Indians, but found a bloody path where the enemy had escaped, leaving behind injured men. Church and his team fought the enemy in a swamp protected by the Indians, but found a bloody path where the enemy had escaped, leaving behind injured men. They saw an enemy who pressed his gun against his chest and signaled to him, but he was shot. The enemy gathered at the top of a tree, but they never found Mr. Church. Church's men ran over a log into the fort and took shelter in a corn crib, but they were hit by 3 shots. The English people in the fort started to burn the wigwams and houses, and Mr. Church worked hard to stop them. The general told him to save the wigwams from the fire and came back that same night in the storm and cold. Captain Church benefited a lot from the English army because they pushed the enemy east of the Taunton River, bringing his work closer to home. He had an edge in how he moved through the woods, making him seem more impressive than the others. Captain Church learned from the governor that a big Native American army was found, and they were going to attack towns across the river. He told Captain Golding to take the glory of attacking Philip's offices, reminding him to be cautious when dealing with the enemy and to shoot at any quiet targets. In 1676, Captain Church and his team faced an enemy group led by Philip's main leader, Old Anawan. Philip, carrying a gun and powder horn, was captured in 2 ambushes set by Captain Church and was killed by the enemy. The enemy got away in a swamp, and Captain Church told the person who shot Philip, who then ordered the shooter to be executed. Captain Church came back to the island and was paid 30 shillings for each enemy he killed or captured instead of receiving regular pay. In August, the crew got 4 shillings and 6 pennies a man, except for the glory of killing Philip. Leader Church looked for Anawan, who was Philip's main leader. Captain Church and his Indian troops confronted Anawan and his army, but they eventually gave up their guns. The old man and his friends were thankful for Captain Church's help and support. Mary Rowlandson, the wife of Reverend Joseph Rowlandson, was captured by Native Americans on February 10, 1676. The Indians killed or captured 48 English residents, but Rowlandson lived by being helpful to her attackers. She records 20 places she was taken before finally being released at Redemption Rock, which is now in Princeton, Massachusetts. Her story is valuable because it shows creativity and bravery, giving us a glimpse into the thoughts and experiences of Native Americans. Rowlandson's time in prison is explained through a number of places she was taken. They met Indian leaders like Weetamo, Quanapin, and King Philip. Rowlandson's time in prison involved a lot of moving around, which was a strategy used during the war to prevent expensive fights with English colonial soldiers. Rowlandson met different Native Americans, but she was never sexually harmed or attacked by them. She received a piece of horse meat and a piece of bear meat for her cap. Thanks to her strong will, faith, and natural survival skills, she was able to survive the hardships of moving through the winter snows with very little food, clothes, or housing. Rowlandson, a Native American woman during the American Revolutionary War, struggled a lot to find food and housing in Massachusetts. She found solace in the company of wigwams and found solace in the company of a kind squaw. Her 11th move took her further north, where some Indians were attacked by Mohawks. 4 were killed, and the others had to retreat. Rowlandson thought it was a good thing because her son, who was held captive, might have been sold to the French. After her 15th move, the Native Americans had come back to Massachusetts and she struggled with not having enough food and a place to stay. She faced death threats for things like begging or breaking Indian practices. She felt hopeful when she heard that her boss, Wachusett, would free the prisoners in 2 weeks. During her trip to Wachusett, she met King Philip and was offered 2 weeks more to be mistress. Rowlandson met up again with her boss Wetamore, who suggested she go back to her home for food. In 1675, Captain Thomas Wheeler and Captain Edward Hutchinson were sent by colony leaders to find out what the Nipmuc people intended to do and to ask for their support. They entered Nipmuc country and saw that the Indians had left their homes and run away. They set out to bring a word from the honored governor and council, wanting to come to a treaty of peace with them. However, some Topsachums did not meet them. Captain Hutchinson and his team, along with 3 key residents of Brookfield, moved toward the swamp where the Indians were located. They were surprised by the perfidious Indians who sent out fire. 8 guys died and 5 were injured. The story is about the Battle of Brookfield, where the English and Native Americans fought against each other. The English residents were attacked and trapped, but the Indians finally left, showing a flaw in their plan. King Philip's War, which took place from 1675 to 1676, was a tragic and transformative conflict that left a lasting mark on American history. It resulted in immense loss of life, with thousands of Native Americans and English colonists killed and the destruction of towns and villages across New England. For the Native American tribes, the war represented a devastating blow to their autonomy, culture, and population, as many survivors were killed, enslaved, or forced to flee. For the English colonists, it solidified their control over the region, but at a significant cost, as it exposed their vulnerabilities and reshaped their sense of identity and resilience. The war marked the end of large-scale native resistance in New England, and set a precedent for the future treatment of indigenous peoples in America. Remembering King Philip's War serves as a reminder of the consequences of cultural clashes and the enduring struggles for land, identity, and survival.